Joe Nicolosi returned to write this season, only now he planned on giving us an arc with a new co-writer as well, Jason Waite. They planned on giving us something that was only labeled the Shizno Paradox. At first, I was actually pretty excited. Just seeing the word Shizno filled my head with all kinds of thoughts. Were we gonna get the return of aliens, or maybe we'd learn the origin of where the term came from? But man, was I wrong. The word paradox should have been a red flag because God only knew we were dealing with time travel. After the events of season 15 and Donut being struck with some electricity, he goes MIA to reveal to us later on that he's met God. Fucking God. And if you think that's a spoiler, you're wrong. That's the setup to the entire season. The electricity that Donut was struck with sent him basically into time itself. Here he met God and now he's trying to get the Reds and Blues to fix time by time traveling. All Donut ever says is to save the future, you must fix the past.
To save the future, we must fix the past. Remember, saving the future means fixing the past! To save the future, we must fix the past!
Now, if that's not the most absurd thing you've ever heard in your entire life, I don't know what is. And this entire season is banking on the concept. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, he's not the only god. You have an entire group of them called the Cosmic Powers. So, if you haven't seen the season, there's the setup. I can't really talk about anything without spoiling the rest of the story, so if you haven't seen it, watch it for yourself and form your own opinion. I want to start off here by talking about the good. What did this season do right? Because this list is much shorter than what it did wrong. First off, the animation. It wasn't all great, but during the final episode where Doc and Donut are fighting on top of that plane, that looked amazing. It's one of those things where I look at that scene and I look at other moments where the environment was computer generated and can't tell why this one's better than the other. Most of the scenes in the final episode looked pretty good, and maybe that has something to do with it. Perhaps more money was dumped into making the final episode of the season look as good as possible, and if that was the case, then it worked. I've never been blown away by how the animation has looked, the only exception being Season 8's reveal because that was a literal change. But things never really looked right, and I thought it somehow got worse in the Chorus trilogy. It's not perfect this season either, but it's been a while since I looked at a scene and said wow. One of the other things this season did very well was Kaikaina. She hasn't been part of the main cast in over 10 years at this point, and I was more than excited to have her rejoin everyone. She was always one of my favorites, so to see her back with everyone again was a welcome sight. She didn't really grow, more so there were a lot of deep conversations that she had and was a part of. We got to learn more about her as a person rather than fixing a flaw. The shining light to this whole season, however, had to be Wash and Carolina's whole story. In a plot filled with time travel and gods, these were the only two who remained grounded in reality. After having gotten shot in the neck last season, Wash is still in the recovery process, but as we later learn, he's not getting that much better mentally. He has gaps in his memory, he's forgetting stories he's already told, and just seeing this character that has been through so much go through this, it was genuinely sad to see in the best way possible. Carolina's just there to kind of deal with it and try to help him through everything. Shannon and Jen did a phenomenal job voicing their lines. There's a lot of scenes between the two that require a lot of emotion that the characters have never really had to show before. Specifically in episode 13 is where this shines the best. And the story that Wash told about his cat Loki was amazing storytelling. The first time he tells it, it's in the beginning of the episode. The audience has never heard it and it's quite cheerful and happy. But when the episode ended with the exact same story, the tone was completely different. Wash is still happy to tell it because he doesn't remember, but for everyone else, it's just heartbreaking. And Carolina, I'm sure, has heard the story more than anyone else. These two, if anything, are the saving grace for this season. Unfortunately, the rest of the episodes were incapable of delivering such captivating storytelling. Wash and Carolina were ultimately a side story that didn't garner the amount of screen time it deserved. Now we get to the real meat of how this season went wrong. First and foremost, the plot. It's already risky enough to base an entire arc around time travel, but introducing gods? They wanted the audience to believe that we were dealing with actual God, the creator of everything. You think that might be jumping the shark? Anytime a new writer comes along, people always say that they want the same thing, but different. Usually by different, they want the stakes to be raised a little bit, but here, they raised the stakes all the way to another plane of existence. And that was the first mistake. Red vs. Blue has always had this level of believability to it. When you ask the question, why is this group of soldiers dealing with this problem? Why isn't someone else doing it? Why is it all happening to them? The answer has always remained clear. With stories like Project Freelancer, which lasted the first 10 seasons, it was always this personal vendetta held by the Alpha. Each and every one of the characters' lives was affected by the director, and it kept itself neatly contained and subsequently the same for Chorus, but different. On top of that, and this needs to be brought up, Halo. There are those who will swear that everything is canon, and there are those who will denounce it, saying that Halo should never be brought up when talking about Red vs. Blue because it has absolutely nothing to do with it. To denounce it, I find completely ridiculous. Red vs. Blue has always followed Halo, its rules, and even its story, but being loose while doing so. It doesn't cement everything, but neither does it chuck it out the window saying it doesn't exist. It plays by its rules and lore, but it doesn't play its game. So having the audience believe that real gods were in play the entire season was a bad judgment on the writer's part. But what about them being an AI? That fixes the part about them being gods, right? No. If anything, I was hoping that they were only worshipped as gods and had no actual power. Like they were a bunch of sissies who could easily be killed when their feet were put to the fire. But no, they're still blowing up goddamn moons and opening black holes. Who gives a shit if they're AI? Humans can't do that. My AI can't even make a goddamn phone call on its 5th attempt. The cosmic powers are gods in every way other than name. They're way too overpowered to be in this show. Speaking of the plot, Season 16 is the first season in the Shizno Paradox arc, but Season 16 takes place seconds after Season 15 ended, so shouldn't Season 15 technically be the first season of the Shizno Paradox? No, it's not. Season 15 has been labeled as its own standalone season. At first, nothing seems wrong with that, until you learn of the completely absurd shit that was Krovos' plan. Krovos' plan was all set up so he could strike Donut with electricity and pull him into time. So this season tries to have us believe that Krovos knew the Blues and Reds had a grudge against freelancers, and with their own plan would attempt to hunt them down. Then Krovos could mentally influence and plant ideas into Loco's brain to build a machine, but during this process Krovos knew it would gain the attention of the Reds and Blues, leading events to play out exactly how they did. So Season 15 isn't a standalone season. If anything, this damaged it. All Season 15 was initially was the idea, what if the Reds and Blues went evil instead of good? That's all it was, and I thought it was a neat concept. But this season tries to pass it off as though some god had the whole thing planned out. It's not a standalone season if that's what happened. They could have just passed it off as though Donut accidentally was saved by Krovos. But no, they tried to tie it together in the most unbelievable way possible. For me, it actually harms Season 15 in a big way. The writing. Many people know that Joe has returned to make this season, but what it seems not many of the same people are aware of is his co-writer, Jason Waite. You see, last season, Season 15, I constantly describe as being so close to being great. For being his first season, I thought if Joe fixed what went wrong there, it would translate better to a next season. He even made an entire journal post talking about how he looked at all the criticism and planned to improve. So what happened? It seems like if anything, this was a step back, or not even a step, a jump back. Or more realistically, he turned around, got in his car, drove a mile in the other direction, and crashed into a ditch. Yeah, it's more like that. Characters were acting like their undeveloped past selves. People were telling jokes whenever the fuck they wanted. It was ruining scenes, it was ruining the characters. And the only question I can ask was, what happened? I'll tell you what I think happened. The addition of a co-writer. Season 15 was solely written by Joe, but now for this arc, a newcomer was tasked with writing as well. In fact, he wrote almost half of this season. 6 of the 15 episodes were written by him. Upon learning the episodes he wrote, I thought to myself, well, these are all the episodes that have the most glaring problems in them. These are the episodes where characters are being given the wrong dialogue. These are the ones that interrupt serious moments with stupid one-liners. This is the one that had the fucking Gusclops. I think Joe may have actually learned from his past mistakes. But now you have another new guy who's never written the show before. I'm not saying he's the reason the season sucks, but it sure as hell explains why it seems like Joe ignored the people complaining about the meta jokes and pop culture references. He's not the guy writing them. He's not off scot-free. He still came up with the concept of time travel and gods and pizza, but from a writing standpoint and a character developmental standpoint, it seems this might be the reason so much went wrong. I don't want to be vague about what happened, so let's talk about it. First, the dialogue. With the exclusion of Jax as a mainstay, jokes talking about filmmaking tropes should theoretically have disappeared when he's not on screen. That didn't happen. Instead, the jokes were still being written, but instead given to random characters.
It was all about story structure.
Like for movies?
Yeah, and TV and whatever. See, the book talks about these things at the beginning of stories. They're called incendiary incidents. They're these things that make stories happen.
You know that cliche in horror movies where the main character thinks they've killed the monster and lets their guard down for a second, but actually it's slowly getting up behind them without them knowing?
In episode 11, Genkins has a line.
Hey, I didn't get a wish!
Don't you get enough dong? It's funny because she's a hussy.
But Genkins has never met Sister, he knows nothing about her, and he shouldn't be the one making this joke. It's a character joke that the audience gets, but shouldn't be handed to someone who's never interacted with this character. In episode 14, after Huggins dies, Muggins gives a speech about her.
Ironic that friends, who we would defend with our lives, are so often the ones we hurt.
The speech's context in and of itself is just fine, but it doesn't reflect what's supposed to be the topic. The whole thing is about the Reds and Blues, but it tries to play it off as though Muggins is talking about Huggins, and it doesn't work in the slightest. Probably the worst thing the season had to struggle with was its tone. The balance between comedy and drama was terrible. Inherently, neither one of the two is bad, but they were mixed together in the worst way possible. Anytime something serious was happening, it was just undone by a joke. In episode 11, Sister gives Tucker a real reflection as to the person he really is, but Griff is there to ruin the moment.
That must have really cut you to the bone! Zow!
In episode 13, both Washington and Donut feel genuinely betrayed by what they considered friends, but Sister's there to ruin the moment.
Y'all need therapy.
In episode 14, the tension that the Fates had put the audience in was broken by Genkins' one-liner.
Smoke him if you got him.
The season never let the moments play out. The only time I can say it successfully didn't interfere were episodes 8 and 9 with Wash and Carolina. Those two are the best episodes in the season not only because it was grounded, but it also let the serious moments be serious. I don't know why the writers constantly felt like they needed to add comedy, but in attempting to do so, it ruined many scenes. The time travel. This is yet another negative to be tagged to the series. But wait, they've done time travel before. Church went back in time in season 3. At the time, yes, Church did indeed do so, but some people haven't seemed to recognize that's been retconned. That wasn't actual time travel that was happening. Later on, it was changed to that all being a simulation that Gamma was running the alpha through. Yes, during the time it was released, it was real time travel, but by the time this season came around, that was long changed. The only person you can really say that has time traveled is Tucker in Wyoming. I wouldn't count it as time travel because they can't really choose when they go to. It's more of a checkpoint system, and there wasn't even a choice for possibility to happen. All Tucker could do was win. The loops wouldn't let any other outcome happen, so technically it was time travel, but that's being very generous. So why did this one not work? Well, it's as simple as it was never explained. When the season first began, you think that they're showing us how the time travel works rather than explaining it. Now, that seems great. I'd rather see all the characters going around doing shit instead of them standing around explaining it to me. So where's the problem? The time travel was inconsistent. In the first few episodes, it seemed like they can't change anything. Sammy Raphaelo's was destroyed, they go back, they destroy it. Sister and Tucker almost have sex, they go back and cockblock themselves. Sarge tries to save his squad only to kill them. Time was seemingly set in stone. No matter where you went or what you did, history would play out exactly as it always has. Then, all of a sudden, shit's changing. They're pulling people out from history. They're causing world events. They're appearing in ancient pictures. What happened to history being set in stone? Now shit's being altered. That's the problem with the time travel. So, alright, the show don't tell option didn't work. Maybe just straight up telling us how it works will go better.
See, a paradox is a contradiction in reality. Most films deal with the problem by creating a closed loop. According to that, like Primer, like Kyle Reese impregnating Sarah Connor, or maybe like back in the J.J. Abrams parents for fun. Everything does.
That did not help. In fact, the conclusion they come to later on is who gives a shit? Time travel is just time travel. Things change, things can't change. The series is good, the series is bad. Things make sense, things don't make sense. Who cares, right? It's lazy writing. Instead of explaining to us how things should and shouldn't work, they settled on everything. No matter what your conclusion of time travel is as an audience member, this season will find a way to agree with your end result. That's why the time travel is bullshit. I mainly just want to talk about two people specifically, Tucker and Gankins. Deep down, it sucks that Tucker has to be put into the negative column for the season because you know they tried. For characters like Sarge or Simmons who never get any real sort of development will never be put into the bad or good aspects for a season. So when they try and give development to a character, more times than not it'll result in being a positive. So why is Tucker a negative? To put it plain and simple, Tucker was already an incredibly developed character. He had glimpses of it in the first 10 seasons, and Chorus really flushed him out and made him grow. This season undid all of that so they could try and do it again. He was telling people to bow to him, he wasn't letting anyone do anything. They completely reset his character. If they had replaced him with literally any of the other Reds or Blues, then it could have turned out really well. They took the only one of them that had any substance to them and ruined it. To fix this, I would have noticed that yes, Tucker and Sister have this sex thing in common, but it would have harmed Tucker if we had tried to go down this path. Instead, you could have had some nice brother-sister bonding between her and Griff. Yes, they don't have these sexual personalities in common, but if you were looking to develop Sister, then there's a more obvious character that could help out. In fact, if they had replaced Tucker with Griff, then that pizza plot that went nowhere would be erased and we'd be that much closer back to a character-driven show. The writers should have been able to realize that Tucker had had enough development and could have put Griff in. But now for Gankins. Gankins is a horrible villain. Simple as that. He has no motivation and he's not relevant to anything that's happening. That's when you know you have a useless character. If you can remove their existence from the season and have nothing change, that's a failed antagonist. I mean, just think about what really would have changed if Gankins had been removed. All he did for 13 episodes was make jokes, so there's no loss there. Well, he killed Huggins, which prevented her from informing the cosmic powers that everyone was time traveling. But if she had lived, then by the time she had informed everyone, the Reds and Blues would have already been in the past. The only thing Gankins did was make sure the Reds and Blues succeeded in saving Wash. That's all he was there to do. All of the characters were already in agreement that saving Wash was their plan. The only thing Gankins did here was explain the plot to Griff. Had he never existed, Griff would have just been with everyone when they saved Wash. Gankins was of so little importance that if you erased him from existence, I think the season would have been better. With the other past villains, erasing them would have negatively affected the show. The Meta, while he didn't really affect the outside world, was an interesting character. Whereas if you were to erase Felix or Locust, then the entire plot goes away. Without either of those two, the war on Chorus never happens. Their motive was pretty boring as it was nothing but a payday, but they got more interesting towards the ends of their characters. But Gankins is neither interesting nor relevant. If you ask me, he might be the worst character to exist in the entirety of Red vs. Blue. I feel weird talking about the comedy because it's something that everyone has different tastes in. There's really no bad sense of comedy, but I wanted to talk about something that I found unfortunate. I could not for the life of me find the specific RT podcast where Bernie was talking about a review that was made for the show many years ago. He said something along the lines of how the review just described RVB as dick jokes, and Bernie seemed upset at that because at the time the only potential dick joke was Tucker.
You have fucking rifle, I can't see shit. Don't bitch at me because I'm not going to just sit up here and play with my dick. Okay, look.
Like I said, it was a review from a long time ago. Since then, more dick jokes have been added, primarily with Griff, but very frequently. But to me, that type of review showed that that's how people who don't really watch the show view it. It's just a bunch of people standing around making dick jokes all the time. And I think the show has worked so hard to kind of distance itself from that stigma. Anyone who watches it always needs to tell their friends that A, it has nothing to do with Halo, and B, it tells a genuinely good, heartfelt story, but it's also funny without having to rely on cheap laughs all the time. And this season's comedy was everything that I think Red vs. Blue has never tried to be, and that's just dick jokes.
I was just expecting bigger.
It's a good size. It's big enough for you. What were you expecting?
I don't know. Longer? Wider? Deeper?
Donut did tell us that his hole can only fit 2 grown men at once. Aren't you worried about capacity?
Sure you can, motherfucker!
I bring news. He saith Tucker is a butt, a dildo, that he hath a dildo up the butt.
What?
He saith that cannot maintain an erection. He hath dubbed this condition Wangxiety. Perhaps thou art the king of masturbating, jack of all offs, master of baits, and a cockbite of the highest order.
I want an 80-foot dong!
Oh my god.
Okay, I wish for an 80-foot dong 3 times. I want a 200-foot dong!
You're on a dick, dude.
Mine's bigger.
No, it's a science.
Your science looks like a one-eyed trouser snake.
Man, I had this feeling, and it kept growing, and it was so hard.
There's no subtlety to it, it's just being written and put into the show. It's sad to see that this was the majority of comedy that was coming out of the season. The response to this season by the audience has been majorly negative for all reasons I've said in this video, and I'm sure things I didn't mention. But something the audience has had a tendency to do, whether it be this show, Ruby, whatever, is say things like, get rid of blank, they can't tell a story, get someone who knows what they're doing, or bring back someone else. For me, that's crossing a line. It's practically saying that a writer is incapable of writing and will never improve, so thus should be stopped from writing. Yes, I hated this season, it's one of the worst, but I'm a firm believer that the moment anything is released for the public to view is open to criticism. It should be the ability to separate the art from the artist, and to say that a writer should be stopped from writing is such an insult to them as a human being. It's saying that you have no faith that they'll get any better. I did not like this season, but that does not mean I don't like Joe or Jason or anyone else who worked on the show. Just because you hate a season doesn't mean you hate the show. When the audience expresses how they did not like the season, it's not because they hate it, it's because they care about it. Most people, I'm sure, don't say they need to get rid of the current writers, but for the people that do, they need to learn to stop. The last thing I wanted to talk about but couldn't really place anywhere else in the rest of this video is actually a question. I'm curious to know what you think Red vs. Blue is now. A common defense I see for this season is when people say, well, Red vs. Blue is a comedy, it doesn't need to make sense. And that's something that I myself couldn't disagree more with. I think in the earlier days, specifically with Blood Gulch, back then it was more about comedy than the story. But since Project Freelancer and Chorus, I think the status quo of what the series is has changed. It needs a more comprehensive story, it needs characters that have grown. I'm not saying that the show hasn't been funny for all of those years, but it seems like this season valued comedy over story. For me, the show is always at its highest when there's a story. So when a season tries to go back to pure comedy, things just don't feel right. After everything these characters have been through, you want to see how they've grown and where they go. But that's something that I ultimately wanted to ask you guys. In the end, Season 16 is not a good season. It focuses primarily on comedy over story, but that's not the reason it fails. Our heroes were reset, the writing is bad, the jokes don't land, there's horrible tonal changes, and the antagonist was boring. Season 16 failed in more ways than just one. If I had any advice for the writers going into next season, just let the moments play out. If something serious is happening, don't throw a joke in to try and be funny. Also, limit the jokes. Red vs. Blue is about the characters, not the jokes that they tell. If you write a joke, don't just hand it to whoever's there and try to write a scene around it. This season did drama much better than it did comedy, so perhaps try focusing on that. And finally, if the concept is bad, it doesn't matter how well you write, because everything branches out from that point. So try not to lose as much of the audience on the concept next season. With that said, that is going to do it for this video. What do you guys think of the season? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Be sure to let me know all of your thoughts down in the comments below. And in the meantime, be sure to like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you're interested in more content like this, consider becoming a sponsor over on Patreon, you get all of the content early, and it really does help out the channel. Be sure to follow me on all social medias, and I'll see you in the next video.